Good day and welcome everybody. My name is Russell Hendrickson. I'm the President and CEO of Practical Data Solutions, and thank you for joining us for Data-Driven Analytics, Enhancing Denial Recovery. And I'm pleased to have Nick Rodriguez joining me today for today's presentation.
Hey, Russell, thanks for having me. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Today's webinar is part 2 in our 6-part fall data-driven webinar series. The series revolves around how to utilize analytics to be more data-driven, to have a more data-driven healthcare culture and improve organizational performance in key areas. And just to give you an idea, we've been helping organizations in key areas such as, patient access, physician productivity, general ledger, and a couple other areas, as you can see. But today's topic, we're going to be focusing on denial recovery, and that's a big area we do help customers with.
Yeah, so, denials in particular, big challenge for organizations. And as we'll talk about, a big cost of potential lost revenue if not managed appropriately. And so, whether we want to be able to look at denial trends and start to benchmark where we are against them, or be able to match our denials and understand what is our true denial rate over a period of time or our clean claim rate, and then even looking further, when we think about recovering denials, are we collecting those payments after we recover denials? And ultimately, how does that impact the organization? And how do we use information not just to resolve or, work denials after they occur, but how do we really use analytics and data to better manage and ensure that we're reducing the number of denials we're getting, which is ultimately the goal, right? Trying to reduce those denials. And so these are all the different things that we're going to talk about in today's webinar.
Yep, and just to go over a couple of the highlights here. So in today's webinar, we're going to discuss, what it means to have a data-driven culture. We're then going to take those principles of a data-driven culture and apply them to denials. We're going to discuss the concept of analytical intensity and how to use that to gauge where your organization fits in. And throughout the webinar, we'll talk about how to utilize tools and different strategies more effectively around your denials. And ultimately, we're going to talk about how to measure if we were successful with our data-driven strategies around denials.
And so, this term data-driven, obviously it's a key part of our whole series, but what does it mean to be data-driven? You can't hear today, it's just everywhere. What does it mean, Nick? And how do we apply that?
Yeah, great question, Russell. I really like to break it down into 3 main areas, right? Data-driven organizations, number 1, they focus on the continuous use of data. Number 2, they effectively apply data to uncover opportunities within their organization. And they also, number 3, gain insights from data to find and improve in gaps in their performance. And, when discussing this concept, you heard me say the word continuous use of data, right? I like to stress that because it isn't about just running a report once on something. It's about our, consistent measurement of our initiatives. And, in my role, I have the pleasure of speaking with a lot of different organizations across the country, and a lot of them I hear are striving to be more data-driven, right? We hear it all the time. But there are a handful of reasons or challenges on why that can be difficult. 2 areas that I do want to highlight from this slide. Number 1, looking at staff resources, especially in the last 2 or 3 years with all the labor shortages. It's made it really difficult to hire and retain staff that have that high level of expertise needed to take on analytical endeavors. The second thing I'd like to focus in on is budget. Shifting budget priorities also makes it really difficult to invest in long-term analytics planning. Becoming a more data-driven organization can really be a journey that takes time. And I think this makes it difficult from a budgeting standpoint for some organizations as well.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of challenges, especially with some of the changes that CMS sort of brought back in 2023, and even a little bit of where we're headed. But as you mentioned, Nick, it's kind of a journey, right? So, what are some of the common traits when we look across more data-driven organizations, or that organizations that I would put in the top 20% of that are really focused on being data-driven? And certainly number 1 jumps out is that data-driven organizations, they have this ability that the users, where at whatever level, wherever their role, have access to data, sort of access to data live on demand. They can point and click and drag and drop and really start to understand and gain insights very quickly. And with that really leads into the second, which is then the ability, organizations have the ability to explore data, looking for performance insights, performance gaps, and opportunities to leverage data and turn them into strategies for operational performance improvement. They talk about data, they bring data to meetings. One organization that I've worked with, if you start to quote metrics or statistics or data as a problem, they want to see the data behind it. It's almost like, don't bring up an issue if you can't validate that issue or support that issue with some data. And of course, you mentioned continuous improvement, and then that commitment to analytical investment. Ultimately, it's leveraging data, and it really becomes part of the organizational culture.
Yeah, and one thing I like that that was on that slide and you touched on was you mentioned that data-driven organizations treat analytics as an investment. And when thinking of investments, it's always important to consider the ROI of an investment or an initiative within our organization. And focusing on denials has one of the highest ROIs from an organizational standpoint, because so many areas within an organization are affected by denials. Things like registration, benefits verification, coding, payment posting, just to name a few.
Yeah, it's interesting, the impact of denials, and doing some additional research as we were working on this presentation. I was a little surprised. I mean, I knew the impact was high, but one source that I read said 90% of lost revenue in in a healthcare organization is due to denials. 90%. Wow. I wouldn't have thought it was that high. I would have put it between 70 or 80, but whatever the right number is, clearly it's a key area and part of why we're focusing on it. As we talk about what are processes internally that do not impact denials, we didn't really have anything to put here. I think in one webinar a few years ago, we had a tumbleweed go by, but I think that's lost in this webinar format. So instead, we've got somebody holding a sign. Right?
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. But thinking forward, there's really three areas that we want to focus in on about the impact of denials on revenue. Number one is that if the average claim denial rate in an organization is anywhere between 5 and 20%, and from what I've been reading, and certainly what we hear from our customers, if you're down at 5%, you're probably in the top 10% of organizations that are really aggressively managing and to that. But what surprised me a little bit, and I went out and validated this, was that only still today about a third of denials are appealed. So right away, there's a huge impact on the bottom line of revenue, which really could even be productivity loss, right? So that's number one.
Yeah, and the second impact, the second area that denials impact, revenue, is recovery costs can be significant, right? It costs approximately $10 to file a claim the first time, but the cost to follow up and resolve a denial can often run more than the filing of the original claim. And that doesn't even take into consideration, what if we get more than one denial on a claim, right?
Yeah, what's interesting here is, so again, in doing some research, whatever the right number for your organization, the cost to file a claim, I saw in some cases, sources citing, as low as $6.50 to file a claim. And clearly we've seen technology and improvements in, how we bill, et cetera, in driving down the cost to file claims. So that's the good news here, is that the range may be lower, especially as you continue to scale or as the organization grows. But on the other side, the cost to resolve a denied claim certainly hasn't gone down, in part because of labor costs, and all the other things related to that area. So we're still seeing that those resolving claim costs go much higher. So trying to get your claims through without denials obviously is the key, because this is one key area on cost that we want to focus in on. The third area then to consider is that time is money. The longer it takes to get that claim paid, the more money we're potentially losing or delaying payment on. So, if we submit a claim within 25 to 30 days, we should see the cash coming back. If it gets denied right away, that the time it's going to take to get paid is another probably 30 to 60 days. So we're right away losing money just in not being able to collect that open AR.
Yeah, and there even becomes a point, after say like 60 or 80 days that $100 claim with multiple denials becomes too expensive to even recover. Might not be worth it. So
yeah, I mean, imagine if it gets denied again, right? So that's where you have to really kind of consider certainly what we're looking at there.
Yep. And of course, claim denials can happen for a lot of reasons. Some of the more common ones are, things like incorrect patient registration information, duplicate claim submission, or even, claims past submission deadline from our payers.
Great places to start. What's interesting is if you really dig behind the denials, and I'm sure probably everybody that's on this webinar today has done this, but if you actually look at the denial detail that comes back in the electronic posting, you'll see things like denial codes that have this, X03, Z04. The description of the denial is kind of cryptic, and in some cases the denial descriptions are the same, even though the denial codes may be different. So, one of the first things that we need to do when we think about working with denials is to try to sort out and create some meaningful way to understand where our denials occurring, right? Because we can't really work the problem if we just try to work with that detailed sort of bee's nest of issues. We have to be able to sort them out. So the first thing we want to be able to do is to create denial categories. Things like what are documentation related issues or authorization issues or non-covered services. And we also along the way want to throw out those informational denials that aren't really denials. They're just information that's posted in the denial field, but the claim was still, paid. So we want to get rid of those, which just really make noise and create a little bit of havoc. And in doing so, then when we start to look at reports, if you look over here on the right side of the screen, this is just a static visual dashboard, but you can see we can then start to categorize where are the likely source of denials coming from. Are they registration issues? Are they billing issues? Are the issues related to the information the patient might have given us? So it's a great place to start by being able to sort out the denial categories. But let's dig a little deeper into that.
Yeah, I always think there's an added benefit to categorizing your denials because you can really further segment them into areas that, we have high control over versus areas we have low control over. And, let's dig into that a bit more, right? So what is a high control process? These are areas we have a little more control over. It's easier to, recover denials that are occurring, and we're usually more successful collecting on them when they do occur, right? Another point I want to make is that, we can use data to identify these areas. And by doing so, it's easier to put things in place and processes in place to prevent them from occurring again in the future, right? So some of these high control areas, include things like, registration, pre-authorization, referrals, coding, and more. Russell, did you want to talk to the low control denials maybe?
Yeah. So, again, high control, low control, going back to that for a second, the more control we have, we can better manage preventing denials, or we can certainly have more, control and understanding how we can fix those really things that we're
Right.
impacting and potentially self-sabotaging, denials. Low controls, obviously things like the payer policies or service not covered, or maybe patients, again, not giving us the information we need, which may be more of a challenge to correct. So being able to categorize denials, we really can focus then on what we have more control over, what can we better impact versus maybe low control that we just have to try to manage with what we have to work with if we don't have as much impact on it. And so when you think about that, we can then take that same information and put it into a dashboard. And most organizations are doing something like what you're seeing here, where we've got some key denial metrics at the top. Maybe we've set some targets or goals that we're measuring ourselves against. But you can see right here in the bottom screen, this high impact versus low impact, and then some of those denial categories. We can see right away 67% of our denials are things that we have more impact on. So that would tell me in this organization, there's a lot of room here where we might be able to improve our denial rates or our denial prevention rates. And again, many organizations doing these things, when we think about tying in denials to revenue integrity, building out that narrative, most organizations are doing a pretty good job, especially on the back end of the revenue cycle, understanding the impact of denials as it relates to the AR or their clean claim rate, and sort of being able to put that information together so it becomes more meaningful in some kind of a narrative. But we're going to dig a little deeper into analytics and dashboarding, but let's talk about analytical intensity. Nick, can you walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good time to introduce it. So, analytical intensity is really a path that's used to help organizations assess and, measure their usage of analytics and how they can best drive value within their organization. So, I love that you just shared those visualizations, Russell. We looked at a couple examples that included, instances of data summarization, right? what is our denial rate this month, for example? And even, a couple of examples that show trend analysis, how does our denial rate, this month compared to last month, or, this quarter to last quarter? But, as we move up that analytical intensity, journey, right? Let's take it a step further and talk about benchmarking. That's really the next level there.
Yeah, and so certainly, we can think about benchmarking like, we saw having, a benchmark or an internal benchmark that says, we want to get our denial rate under 10%, and we can then measure what the denial rate's running. So that's kind of what people traditionally think about benchmarks. But with denials in particular, there's a real challenge here. And so I want to talk to why we need to restage denials and the importance of leveraging data to better understand the impact of what's really going on with denials. And in order to restage the data, this then provides the context so we can benchmark our performance in a meaningful way. Okay. So let me walk you through that with a very simple example here to illustrate the point. If we look at what was posted in January for our payments and our denials, we might see something like this. And if we expand this out and do this across 3 months, and if this was just our limited data set, as you can see, it looks like our denial rate is climbing, and our reimbursement, or the amount of claims that we're getting that are getting paid, is declining, because we're looking at everything by when it came in, what happened in January, what happened in February, what happened in March. But if we restructure our data in a way that allows us to line up the payments being posted and the denials being posted, not when they come back in from the payer, but putting them back against the original bill date of the service. If we take the same example and we recategorize those denials, we see a very different picture, which is now, if you notice, on this matched payment and denial back to the bill date, we see that our denial rate is actually declining and our reimbursement is increasing because we're matching the payments back to the period it was billed, and we're matching the denials back to the period that it was billed.
Yep. Yeah, good point, Russell. And I'm seeing, I did have a question on this. I'm seeing 2 different measurements of denials, right? Which one's better?
Yeah, well, better is relative. If I'm in charge of working our open denied claims, and this is how many we have sitting in the open items, our open AR, I need to be looking at things operationally. What's the current open denial rate? But if I'm looking from a management perspective, and we're trying to use data and be data driven and focus on how do we prevent denials, and are our prevention strategies working? Maybe we've operationalized some changes at the front desk that we want to then be able to measure. The only way to really accurately measure that is to do something like this, which is more of a matched denial rate. So the answer is really we need both from a management perspective.
That's a good point. Okay.
Going a little further, now that we know what happened within those months and how many denials match back to what was billed, that allows us then to do this, which is really match what's happening after we get a denial. Are we recovering those denials? What percentage of our claims are actually being recovered? Which allows us to measure our denial recovery rate and measure our effective net denial rate. And so many organizations now are starting to do this. I've seen this from a few different ones that say, if we can recover the denial first time around within 30 days, if it's sort of a quick thing we can turn, we may then have an effective net denial rate, which is different than our initial denial rate, because we're really saying, yeah, we had a denial, but we recovered that, versus the ones that have to be worked more than for a period of time or eventually get written off. So it's an interesting perspective. And we can see that again in one of these static dashboards here. Nick, why don't you walk us through what's important on the screen here?
Yeah, I really like this visualization of our, true resolution of denied charges. And, oftentimes by visualizing data, right, you can look at the middle of the screen and see that, you can see how this can be incorporated into a dashboard to help communicate more effectively the resolution of denied charges, right? We can begin to tell the story of what's happening after a denial, what's being paid, what's sitting out there in the AR, or, what's being written off completely. And this really helps us start to see trends and see if the, denial prevention and recovery strategies that we might have implemented, are effective. We can start to measure those kinds of things and see those trends.
Yeah. And, that's a great place to start. But now we're going to talk about being data driven, and we're going to talk about best practices. So let's move out of what I call a static dashboard into a web-based visualization. And that's what you're seeing on the screen here. And let's kind of recap everything we saw, but talk a little deeper using some data behind it as we go. What you're seeing on the screen here is these are denial rates. We've got it sorted by our different departments or divisions. And so I can very quickly see, how is each department performing? At what is their percentage of denials trended? I can also see we've got our denial categories over here for, which are the different areas that are impacting these organizations are seeing the high denials. We could quickly see that we're having trouble with registration denials. Point and click into that area and see we've got a big problem in this department here. And we can even go so far then as to start to see how that might break down by division. So right away, we've got some good ability to explore data when we're starting to understand what's really going on in the organization. Going a little further, because now we've matched and recategorized our denials back, we can see these are the denials that were billed over these months, but then the denied charges, these are the charges that were billed. These are the denials that came in. They might have come in 3 months after, 4 months after the initial billing, but we're putting the denied charge back against the original month billed, and we're not duplicate counting the charges. It only gets counted once. In doing so, then we can measure what is the true denial rate of what we billed in July versus August 1st, September. And we can then start to trend that and see that our denial rate overall looks like it's declining. Of course, if we look at our current month denials, that rate is always going to be lower because many of those denials aren't going to come in until the next period. We can also look at the inverse, sort of the more positive view, which is what is our clean claim rate? Because ultimately our goal is to prevent denials from occurring. So if we can keep focusing on that increasing, that's sort of the positive way to look at it. The other thing that we can do is we can look at our recovery trends, and we can start to see of the amount that was denied, how much has been collected today at the close of this period, even though it relates back to what was billed 6 months earlier. So we can start to understand then how much of the denials are we recovering, and even get all the way down in the ability to look at the detail behind it, the type of denials that are occurring, the payers that they're occurring with. So it gives us a good way to start looking at data, but along the way we have it fully interactive so we can start to explore and understand where the challenges are.
Yeah, and I really like that visualization, incorporated a couple of different, key things we've discussed, right? It had some data summarization, obviously some trend analysis, but also, showcased why, incorporating benchmarks can be important to your organization. So, now that we've discussed, those areas of analytical intensity, let's move to the higher echelons and focus on relationship analysis. So, earlier in our webinar, we had mentioned that denials can come from a variety of areas. So it's really important to analyze the relationship of your denial data to those areas we discussed and better understand, how what we are doing is impacting the level of denials within our organization. And two key areas and things with denials and relationships that I wanted to focus on today are, number one, the denial rates compared across different payers. And number two, physician productivity and the impact of denials.
Yeah, and so, the reason why this is a higher level of analytical intensity is because in order to do just that, we want to focus and understand what's the impact of denials overall on the revenue cycle, on the back end of our revenue cycle. And so what you're looking at here now is a visualization that includes, potentially bringing in our contract fees, as well as our time to payment from the payers, both for clean claims and denied claims. But you'll notice we've also integrated our denial rates. And so you can very quickly start to see here that United has a very high denial rate, but it's also actually one of our better reimbursed payers. But we really want to be able to start to understand, are we recovering? And in this case, we're potentially recovering about a third of what's getting denied. So there might be some operational issues we can improve on. But ultimately, when we start blending data, we're really trying to understand the relationship between our AR, how we're getting reimbursed, and how long is it taking to get paid. This may allow us to understand that maybe we have a great contract with United, but if they're not reimbursing us, or we're getting a high rate of denials that are not recoverable, it may not actually net out to be a better contract than somebody maybe where we have a lower denial rate, but we're recovering, much more. So that's one example where we can start to draw relationships between the data and denials as we start to look across the payers and think about both current, how we're being reimbursed, but also think about how we may want to negotiate changes in payer contracts. Okay. The other area, Nick, you touched in on was, could we blend data and understand the physician's impact on denials? And because we've categorized denials, we could go down and even categorize the denials and relate and say, sort of three key areas that the physicians can impact, medical necessity, the documentation, or even credentialing, right? So sort of physician related denials. And again, through our interactive visualization, we can sort of fairly quickly just go, let's just look at the top, third of physicians that are having a sort of an impact on causing denials or correlated to denials. And you can very quickly sort of slice down to where might we want to focus. Now, we're just looking at the physician's impact of denials. How do we take that to build relationships that either show the physician the impact or help us to understand where there may be opportunity? And so one of the ways we can do that, let me just click over here to another slide, would be to look, for example, at physician productivity on the right side of the screen and understand what is the physician's denial rate and how is that impacting maybe some of the goals that we've laid out, helping them understand the impact on productivity. Certainly, if we have comp plans, if they're RVU based or even directly if they're collections based, right? If the physicians are getting denied claims that they're contributing to, they're not collecting that money. It's not going to be showing up in their salary. So we could dig into this topic a lot further.
Yeah, we can. I was going to say, Russell, we can spend a lot of time talking about physician compensation, but that's really the focus of our part 6 in our webinar series at the end of November. So if you did want to learn more about that, I certainly encourage folks to sign up for that. So.
All right. And thanks for pulling me back. Otherwise, we'd keep everybody.
We could be here for hours,
for another hour just on that topic. So we'll save that for another day. Let's talk a little bit about the technology though behind. I just showed some web-based visualization tools. Most organizations are using something today for visualization. That's certainly been a trend over the last 5 years. Things like Power BI, Tableau, Click, MicroStrategy. These are all common tools used for visualization. Many organizations, though, and that's great, but they may then have a different tool set for doing sort of slice and dice, what I call OLAP analysis, where they want to go in and explore the data. Many organizations may be using things like Microsoft Cubes or Excel, with pivot tables. Nothing wrong with that. That's good. That we want to make sure we have the data. And then, of course, for query type traditional enterprise detailed reporting, many organizations using things like business objects. So that's good that you have the tools in your organization to get and give the users what they need. But there's a challenge because best practices, data-driven organizations know that they can go further and make it easier on the users. Because if I'm in a visual and I can't then slice and dice and drill and have to go to another tool, maybe I don't know how to write that as a query. I may not even have access to that second level of data that I need to really understand.
Yeah, and if we're trying to be a data-driven organization, we want to strive for great, right? Not just good. We want to strive for great. And when thinking of your own analytics strategy, it's best practice to have one tool that services all the different information needs of users. This way, when someone asks questions of the data, right, they get the same answer regardless of where that data came from. You don't have to worry about rewriting queries, depending on the tool. You spend less time questioning the data and more time, making better data-backed decisions instead. And by having it in one tool, users can continue their analysis and flow through the data because it's all in the same, in one tool for all their data needs.
Yeah, so let's explore that in an actual visualization because that sounds great conceptually.
Yeah.
But in my experience, and we see a lot of this where organizations are sort of pursuing the latest in visualization tools, but not thinking about an integrated strategy, and or they think they can get there, but they're challenged as they put it together. But from a technology stack side, what we really want to be able to do is, regardless of what I'm looking at or how I'm looking at the data, right? If I see that we're having challenges in a particular area, having a single solution with a single source of data means I can just literally click right from my visual and move into what is OLAP analysis, or many of you may know it as working with like pivot tables or Microsoft Cubes. And through the technology, I literally went from visual, but now I want to drill down and dig deeper. I can bring in dimensions into my analysis that weren't even in the visualization. And the reason is because the visualization was built off of the OLAP analysis. Right? So if I just build a visual tool, but it's limited by the data inputs, I'm limited as to what I can do with it. by having a single solution with a single tool. Now, after I've explored the data, I want to slice and dice and drill down on Blue Shield charges that were done in family practice in the office. And I want to see the actual number between this 2,251 in February. So I can simply click on that. And now I'm moving from visualization into detail. I'm actually down at the claim level detail. I'm down at the procedure level detail, at the denial level detail. And so if you notice here, I went from visual to cube down to detail. And if you look at the screen here, you'll see here, we're just looking at the claims for family practice. We're just looking at what happened with Blue Shield. And I can continue to then explore this data, work with this data. I can add dimensions to this data. So I'm really not at all limited by what I can do because I don't need another tool. We have one tool, we're working in one place, and I can even continue to explore the data and to start to understand where we're getting denials, why we're getting denials, et cetera. So that's really, from a best practice data-driven side, one tool that's servicing all our different users. And that's so critical with something like denials that has such a big impact on and contributed to by every area of the organization.
I was just about to say that, Russell. That's a huge part of having a data-driven culture, right? It's understanding that different departments and users have different data needs. Even when focusing on denials or other data sets, really, they need to use different data in different ways. The CFO might need to utilize denials information in a very different way from a provider or someone in coding or contract, for example. But at the end of the day, we need to ensure that we're giving information to people in ways they need to have it to be effective in their role. If we're moving to those higher levels of analytical intensity. So with that, we've talked about data summarization, trend analysis, benchmarking, relationship analysis. Let's move to the highest level of analytical intensity, and that's projections, or quantifying the impact or desired outcome of something.
Yeah, and as far as visualizations and a data set to visualize, this is one of my favorites here. I don't know how else to say that, if you can have a favorite analytical visualization tool, but I'm for a lot of reasons. But let's kind of walk through what's going on here, because Nick, as you pointed out, the highest level of analytical intensity is being able to project the impact, right? Mm-hmm. So. And this single page in our visualization really kind of drives everything we've been talking about so far. We can see very quickly registration and coding, which are two high controllable areas of denials, are probably accounting for easily, 20 to 30% of our claims. Okay. In addition, we can see we've got some challenges in gastroenterology, jumping right out. So we can just click and filter in on that. Okay. We can also then start to see what percentage of denied charges are coming by the payers. And so we can also sort of quickly scattergram that, right? And we can see Blue Shield, some of our managed care plans. But over here in the middle of the screen, this is really where the power sort of sets in, which is we can quickly see that of all of these claims, only 20%, if you look right here, this is the recovery rate on those claims. So on these procedures, we're recovering a lot, but on these procedures, we're rarely recovering. And so simply by highlighting these procedures, we can now see exactly how many procedures, what are the procedures. We've also blended in the relationship of not just looking at what was charged, but looking at actually the contract profile amount or the payer, expected reimbursement. So we can then start to see, not only if we look at this unadjudicated, they're not adjudicated, they're sitting in the open AR, how many procedures, how much money is at risk if we don't recover those fees, if we don't recover these denials, versus if we were to click on adjudicated, we can actually see how much revenue was lost due to the impact of denials, and even slice through it in terms of what was potentially, controllable, or if we could keep improving. Why this is so important is when we can quantify the cost of what's going on, whether it's with denials or any other area of your organization, it's much easier, one, to get funding. We talked about having funding, right? To focus in on a problem, or to sign a team, or even to bring in additional resources, because you can easily justify the ROI when you can quantify the cost.
I could really see why that's your favorite dashboard. It's really insightful for shedding light on an issue, right? And where we can focus as an organization.
Yeah, without a doubt. And from a data and analytics side behind the scenes, there's a lot going on there, and very proud of the PDS team, as that's something that's been evolving with both the technology and our data modeling. But that's another topic we'll talk about as well. A couple other key points, though, as we move beyond denials, thinking about HCCs, thinking about payers, value-based contracts. There's common failure points where the payers are limiting their reimbursement, and that's all due to how they're calculating risk scores. And on our analysis, in the top 6 common reasons why the risk scores from payers may be missing data or underrepresentative or underpaying, denied claims often are excluded from the payer's calculations. So, this is another key topic area, and we could get into.
I think you're getting a little ahead of yourself again, Russell, there.
Yeah.
I know we're going to be talking about this. Yeah, we'll be talking about this topic in a couple weeks, 3 weeks from now. So it's another part in our webinar series, leveraging HCCs to improve care. So
okay,
you can join us for that one too.
I'll in the interest of time, I'll move off from that one. Here's one we're not talking about in another webinar, at least not to my knowledge. But data-driven organizations, a lot of the better tools have the ability to do alerting, in the sense that we can have the data. We could set thresholds as it relates to denials and begin to understand, if our denial rate climbs over 10%. Could it not alert the user and then show us, excuse me here, and then show us what the denial rate is, flash that up on the screen and give us, we as a user could then go in and dig into the data and understand. So the ability to use alerting is something that, better practice organizations are able to use and have the tool sets to do that.
Yep. Another point, especially as we look forward, I go to conferences all the time and I read articles on, in healthcare all the time. I keep hearing so much about artificial intelligence and AI and how it's going to change the way we look at things. Do you see AI impacting denials recovery, Russell? Or?
I do, absolutely. I think denials, 2024, 2025, you're going to see the use of artificial intelligence really come into a fairly complex data set. But I would challenge for AI, or even just today with the technology we have for denials and to be able to make sense of it, we're going to have to have good data staging. We're going to have to be able to build some categories. We're going to have to be able to do some of the things we've talked about in this webinar in a way that the data is easier to interpret and then analyze. And so we're going to be talking about that topic coming up in our October 31st webinar on creating reusable data models, where we'll really be talking about the structure of data to do the kind of things that you've seen around denials and in many of the different areas we're focused on in this webinar series.
Yep. So we're going to take questions in a few minutes here, but before we do that, let's start to summarize. We talked about what it means to be a data-driven organization, right? And in order for you to evaluate if you're data-driven, you should think about what we shared and see how you stack up. Start asking questions. Can people quickly analyze and drill into data themselves, or do they require, submitting, or just do they have to submit a report request, for example? Are we benchmarking, blending data, projecting ROIs or for performance gaps routinely, right? Do we have our unique KPIs automated? And most importantly, does our culture support the use of data to make informed decisions?
Yeah, and ultimately our number one goal is to use data and analytics to prevent denials. As we've talked about, the number one way to sort of recoup the most revenue is to focus in on your clean claim rate, right? So some of the ways we can measure, are we being effective with our strategy? Is our denial rates declining? Are we collecting more money when we're recovering denials, and being able to understand what's the impact on our recovery efforts? Can we quickly isolate when denials might pop up in a particular area? Maybe suddenly something changed. Maybe we have some new staff. Maybe we have a new physician, or wherever that area might be. Can we quickly isolate where denials are occurring? And then ultimately, are we focusing our collection efforts on things that we can recover versus focusing them on things we can't recover and sort of wasting that time and those resources?
Yeah, and when I think about this, I always think about, a quote from the great philosopher Anonymous. A denial left unaddressed is an opportunity missed.
Yeah, Anonymous. I think we quoted Anonymous in part 1 of our series. So
easily one of my favorite philosophers of all time, up there with Plato and Socrates. So with that, I did want to say thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. Certainly, if you're having any challenges with your denial data or any other areas of reporting or analytics, or just wanted to talk to us and learn more, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us. Thanks again. Thank you so much for everyone for attending, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.